Alright guys, I've got a 30-minute game on the board, playing an opponent from France. His username is Bobby Fischer is bad, and they are rated 725. So I'm going to go all Vienna on him. Okay, we have bishop out there, and that means the wayward queen is on her way. So we're looking for common errors. What errors do players rated 700 to 800 tend to make? Unforced blunders, failing to scan the board, leaving pieces hanging, and probably falling for basic tactics is what I would normally expect. So here, knight to f6 would be a blunder. Queen out there is okay. Pawn to g6 would be a blunder, because then we've got queen takes pawn with a fork on the king and the rook. Okay, and there we go. So that drops a pawn. There were a few options there. That was not the best of them. So now the king can't castle out of check. The only legal moves are bishop to e7, queen to e7, and king to f8. So we've got the retreat of the bishop, and now I'm a pawn up. So what I want to do is to continue development. That's very important. If I'm going to play d3, I might play d3 or I might play d4 at some point, but I'd like to get my bishop out of off the back rank and give my king opportunities to castle. So I think that bishop to c4 looks very sensible. There's no risk of the queen coming out here, so I'm not in a hurry to play knight f3. This bishop is now pinned. The queen can't get out, the bishop can't get out. So I think a reasonable move now would be knight to c6. Okay, we have castles. Yeah, that's absolutely fair. All right, so what do we do now? I'm thinking d3 looks good to open up path for my bishop, or knight to f3. Queen is the only defender of the pawn on c7 right now. I'm attacking this bishop. The queen is the only defender of that as well. So I don't really want to. I mean, I could move my knight in with a second attacker on the bishop, but that would probably just provoke an exchange of knights on there, which wouldn't be bad for me, but I think getting more pieces into the board would be a good idea. So I'm going to play d3. Adds a second defender to this pawn, or a third defender technically, and now I might bring my bishop out, maybe to g5. Also my knight to f3 is going to come. This is a rated game, so I stand to lose 16 points if my opponent manages to beat me. Okay, and we've got the bishop. So this bishop has now moved 3 times, which kind of explains why black is a little bit behind in development. So I think bishop to d2 looks very sensible. It also gives me the option of castling long if I want to do that. Then if bishop takes, we've got bishop takes, and then I've got both my queen and my bishop are now looking down there. So if I can persuade this knight somehow to move, then I might have attacking ideas. Alright, so pawn push, that kind of makes sense. I'm thinking queen g3 looks good because I'm still looking down at the g7 square. I'm pretty defended, I'm pretty safe. And now what I'm doing is I'm scanning the whole rest of the board. I'm thinking, what else can I do with my queen that could add a threat against black? I can't see anything, so I'm just going to play queen g3. We might now have knight to there, kicking the queen again, but that would not be brilliant. I can just move away from that, and then the knight, of course, on this square is still defending g7. I've got a comfortable setup. Black has lost a key central pawn. Black only has a 1 pawn to my 2 in the middle of the board, which means that I'm controlling more squares. So, right. So now if I initiate the exchange of bishops, we're going to have f takes on e6, and that would give black 2 central pawns again, and also potentially open up a path for that rook. So I'm disinclined to initiate that. b3 might be an option there, so I can recapture with b pawn, giving myself a very healthy central pawn majority. Let's go with that idea. Could also play the bishop back to b2 with the idea of if bishop takes, I could then capture with the a pawn. Now this does split up my pawns a bit, but now I'm probably going to commit to castling kingside anyway. That's a slightly odd move. I mean, it's reinforcing the pawn, but I don't think it's really strengthening black's position very much. So now I'm going to bring my knight out. So now I've almost completed development. So I'm a step ahead of my opponent. If bishop takes here as well, I've even got ideas of at some point castling long and putting my rook on the semi-open file. Okay. So I think captures here is the only realistic option. And if bishop takes, again, we've got the same situation. With this pawn moving forwards as well, it does weaken this diagonal here, and I'm liking my bishop on there. Might be able to sneak my queen into here and then get into g7 and mate that way. Okay, it's captured. So I'm not going to retake. Well, I could do. Another idea is like queen e5, threatening the knight. I'd have then 2 pieces against that knight, queen and bishop. The knight can't move because then I can put my queen onto h8 with mate. And if bishop takes, I simply take the knight and I'm threatening checkmate. And I'm threatening to recapture the bishop. So let's try that as a tactic. Or do I have to worry about bishop takes knight? No, I don't think so. So a few ideas. I mean, castles is one idea. Bishop takes, d takes, attacking the queen. I've always got this move with the queen here, which I do find very tempting. Yeah, let's go with that. I think it's the most pressurizing move. If bishop takes, I might simply recapture, because I'm thinking, okay, bishop takes, I'm down to bishop. I take, queen takes, I take, then the bishop retreats, and that's okay. Then I've got a reasonable pawn structure on the light squares. My dark square bishop can always drop back if it needs to. So I think either is fine. There, capture the knight. Pretty much forces, I think, the queen to retake. Okay, options. Take the knight. That might lead to an exchange of queens. There's a serious danger of rook to e8, which I have not considered. So I think that is forced. So I didn't notice that potential pin on the queen. So at least this move gets out of the pin. Okay, we have queen takes and queen takes. So now he's either going to run away with his bishop or he's going to attack me there. But if he goes there now, I can actually block here with either the bishop or the knight because they're both looking at that square. Alright, so he's gone for a counter-attack on the knight. So he's rescued his bishop. So I'm inclined now, I think one idea is definitely castle long. Then if he captures, I recapture with the pawn. I could move the knight to there, but then, no, that might be alright actually. Might be alright. It's defending the g2 pawn. Now let's just castle and see what happens. So he's only got a light square bishop now, and I've only got a dark square bishop, which to me means if I get my pawns onto light squares, that's no bad thing. You see, I'm not too bothered about these doubled pawns on the f-file now, because it means I can put a rook on the g-file, lined up against black's king, and then I've got lots of pawns that I can push up and trouble this pawn on the g-file. I'm one pawn ahead in material. So let's just... Okay, is there any major threat there? Knight can't go there or there. Now I'm just going to move my rook across. My opponent's actually playing pretty well. What I need to do now is to kind of cement my small advantage that I have of being a pawn up. My bishop can always retreat there to this fianchettoed position. Okay, so is attacking a pawn there. I'm just going to move my king, defend the pawn. I can very easily kick the knight away if I want to. This pawn's protected by the rook. And now it's a case of Freddie and Harry can go about their business and try and crack open the Black King's position. Let's see what my opponent thinks. Well, if he thinks Bobby Fischer is bad, why is he rated 725? Okay. What's his idea? Does he want to attack this pawn? Does he want two attackers on there? I could kick the knight now, which is not a bad idea. I could centralise a rook onto the e-file, which might lead to an exchange of rooks. Kind of like the idea of just kicking the knight. Just get out of my territory. He can't go there, there, there. He can probably go to here, in which case I might just need to retreat my bishop somehow. Okay, so he's now attacking the bishop. I can retreat to d4, which should be fine. Or I could retreat to either of these two squares. Which is best? Kind of fancy coming this way for two reasons. One is if I come here I can always dive in to h6 and cut off two squares from the king. The other one is that it's still guarding this square, which black would like to put his rook on at some point. So I'm just going to move to g5. Also, but if I move back to h4, then the bishop's guarding that pawn. I don't know if he's got ideas about attacking that pawn, but if he does, I don't know if I need to be concerned, because I can play rook g2, rook d to g1, and double up my rooks against the king. So I think this is a flexible move. I think this is okay. So if we have now rook to e2, this pawn is protected, and that's okay. So I might be pushing my f pawn up. Of course, this square is now attacked by the knight. Knight's also defending the c7 pawn. So now we're in a bishop against knight situation, which is a lot more interesting than two bishops. The knight's in a nice central square. I may consider pushing c4 to kick the knight away again. Might even put my bishop there and then kick the knight, and then it will have to abandon the defense of c7. Basic tactics. Removing the defender of a piece or a square. So to do that I would want to play bishop first. Okay, that's interesting. So he's decided to move the pawn, so he's spotted that. So do we want to kick the knight now? Knight can't approach there, or there, or there. It'd probably come to here. Okay, so let's look at that. If pawn goes there, knight comes here. Do we have to worry? I can kick it again with a bishop. Or I could simply move my bishop here and take that square away from the knight. I don't want to move my pawn without very good reason. That's an important thing to remember. This is a kind of defensive move. It does get out of Harry's way. I'll do that for want of a better idea. Now we can have h4, h5, put pressure on this pawn, and then I might get a discovery then by moving my bishop out of the way with check if this pawn disappears. But very solid play so far. Very good play for a 700 rated player. I was expecting more errors than this and an easier ride. So I'm a pawn up, but I do have doubled isolated pawns, so it's dubious whether I have much compensation. Or it's arguable that he does have compensation for his loss of a pawn. So now this is trying to maybe prevent c4, which I get. I'm going to start throwing Harry up. He's not actually called Harry, of course. Just got that as an affectation from Grandmaster Simon Williams, the Ginger GM, who has names for all his pawns. And of all of them, Harry the H-pawn is his favourite. Okay, he's throwing pawns as well. Let's keep going. In this situation, when we've got pawns like this, whichever pawn moves, I can push the other one and lock off the pawns, which is a good thing on your king side. If you want safety, if you want to cut down play, then gridlocking the pawns is a good idea. Now, capturing wouldn't be a terrible move. Okay, so he's pushed. This is good. All right. Because you notice all his pieces now are on light squares, which is very sensible. It means that my bishop now can't dive out and capture. So I'm thinking if I move my bishop now, he's probably going to push his pawns to defend. If I push there and he takes, I can recapture. Let's try that move. This is like a sacrificial pawn. This is my, when I've got these doubled and isolated pawns now, I want to use these as battering rams or kamikaze attacks because they're expendable. So if pawn takes, bishop takes, knight can't recapture because that will come with check. You can see the benefit of moving my rook across to there. Okay, and now this is a blunder. This is a blunder. Can you see the tactic here? He's moved his knight into a position where it is defended by a piece, but as soon as I move my bishop, this piece is pinned, so the pawn cannot recapture. It's the same problem that we had the other way around, and my opponent has misplayed it. So now he's going to be down a full minor piece. Yeah. So he captured the pawn there. Yeah, okay. So now this is still pinned, the pawn's still pinned, so I can't move. So I've got a couple of options. I can throw in a check now, which there's no reason not to do that, or I can push b4 and lock off the pawns on that side. I think I will go ahead and put in the check. Also stops ideas of c5 advancing. So if I push b4 and he pushes c5 now, I can capture. Okay, so I'm going to push b4. So I'm now starting to think of how to take advantage of my extra bishop. Thinking maybe c3 might be good. He's also got some very weak pawns now. So I said we should expect unforced errors, and we've had one. He doesn't want to bring his rook in here to attack the pawn because I can trap it with the bishop there. He's reading my mind. He's reading the wrong bits. Now I could move my rook across here, try and capture that pawn. I don't have to do anything about this rook now. It's totally imprisoned. Cannot move anywhere. But at the same time, I've got two pieces that are busy imprisoning it. If the king moves to here, I've got another tactic, which is rook there, check. King has to move to one of these squares, and then I capture his other rook. And that will be just about winning. I also have a check. Okay. So I'm going to move my rook here. This does two things. It's attacking that pawn, but also there's a discovered attack by the bishop on h6. So I think I will be able to get one of these pawns. Actually, if I move my bishop, it leaves f2 undefended. So I may not choose to do that at this point. Could even think about throwing this all the way up the board, cutting off these squares. Okay, I think that's a decent move. Another idea, d4, bring the king round to attack this guy. I'll move the king once anyway. I can also defend this pawn by moving my rook across, and then I can grab that one with check. This square would be covered by bishop and rook. Not rook there, rook from here, would it be? Yeah, no, from here. So put my rook there. He can't advance that because I can capture with the bishop with check. So there's really no point grabbing a pawn just in order to give another pawn away. If you can find a way to defend your vulnerable pawn, then you can freely grab the material with check, and then my bishop can come back and reinstate the prison on the black rook. So I wouldn't like to be black in this situation now. Okay, king's moved. I have a check. King's also moved onto a dark square, it has to be noted. Now can I just go ahead with this plan? d4 reinforces my rook. These pawns are no danger at all, they can't move. This pawn's going nowhere. Only his f pawn has got any idea of advancing up the board. So if I go, let's see, I go d4, he plays like f5, I come here and actually I win the rook. So let's go ahead with that idea. He hasn't got time to hit the bishop in time. So let's say f4 now, king to here, f5, win the rook, he captures the bishop. Happy days. Also got ideas of moving my rook across to e5. Whoa! That is interesting. Okay, rook to e5 now. King has to move. And then I can... So the king will actually have to move to one of these three squares. Then I can capture his rook. And then I can actually proceed just to gobble up his last rook. So let's do that. This is simplifying. So I'm up in material. And it makes sense for me to force or initiate the exchange, equal exchanges of pieces, because then the more that happens, the greater the impact will be of my material advantage. So now I can come to here, and he should probably just capture the bishop now, but he's in a lost position now. I've got 6 pawns to his 5, and I have an extra bishop. So as long as I don't blunder, we should be in good shape. Now the question is, do I capture with the king or do I capture with the f-pawn? I'm going to capture with the pawn. I'm not afraid of this. There goes the cockerel. Okay, let's try and bust open his pawns. I've got a pawn majority, 5 on 3 on this side, so splitting these guys up will be no problem. And because I've got a rook on the board, I can also kind of imprison his king. I can quarantine his king in a certain part of the board. And as long as he doesn't capture the rook, then we should be okay. I can now move forwards and just grab this pawn with my king. King can't go there. If he goes here, I might even play my rook across. But I think it's going to be too late, whatever Black tries to do. Okay, now I'm just going to push my pawn. When you're up against the king in front of your pawns, it makes sense to have your pawns side by side because they make an impenetrable barrier. You know, when your pawns are on diagonals, then kings can wriggle through. Okay, I'm just going to grab that one. And now rook to g6 is protected by the pawn. The king can't take the rook, but now, crucially, the king can't take the pawn because he can't get anywhere. So the king only has 2 legal moves. None of his pawns can move. His king is going to have to move down the board. Okay, there we go. With my opponent resigns. So yeah, interesting game there. Fairly solid, I think, in the start from my opponent. He did blunder the pawn early on, just on move 3. That wasn't the best move to play. He could have played his queen out here. He could even have moved his bishop back if he wanted to. He could have defended the pawn with his knight. All of those would have been acceptable. And yes, I'd have then brought my bishop out, and then he's got another issue to deal with. So this, you know, in the first minute of the game, you don't need to be doing that. And it did put him on the back foot. Now he has to defend. Now he has to move his bishop a second time. And the game progressed that way. But I think you can see how a more advanced appreciation of tactics helped me in so many ways. And that's really all this is about. I mean, my opponent knows some tactics. Everyone who plays chess knows some tactics. To improve at chess really just means building on your tactical vision, on your imagination of how to use tactics and how to combine them. So let's just play it through again quickly. So here we have a pinned piece, right? This is a tactic. The pin is a tactic. And what I'm doing is I'm breaking the pin and I'm developing a piece at the same time. Captures, captures. Now notice huge imbalance in development at this point already, because if you go back to the beginning, look how many times his bishop moves, okay? This is move 1. It's moved once on move 2. It's moved again. It's moved again. 4 moves for that bishop, right? And then it's gone. Bishop's off the board, taking those 4 moves with it. Those 4 moves have disappeared. That is potentially 4 moves of development that Black could have spent, bringing a pawn out, you know, a bishop out to there, a knight out, and pretty much completed development by this point. But he didn't do it. Okay? So don't move pieces that you've already developed multiple times. And in fact, the original move here, this was his second move, that wasn't actually forced. He could have blocked with the queen as well. But he blocked with the bishop, and there we go. So, carrying on. Little kick on the queen, that's not a bad move. Bishop comes out, defends. Pawn move, debatable. And now we have tactics. So what this is I'm doing a barrage against this knight. So the knight only has one defender, and now it has two attackers. So he captures the bishop, I capture the knight. Now currently I'm still only a pawn up. We exchange queens, and now he needs to retreat with his bishop, which he does. Now I castle, and I give him the opportunity to capture the knight. Now I have doubled and isolated pawns, but I also have a semi-open file for my rook on the g file, which I figured was okay. So knight comes out, which is probably the best move. He's now connected his rooks. My rook comes across. I'm not scared of the big bad knight. Kick the knight away, attacks the bishop, bishop retreats. Pawn moves onto a light coloured square where the bishop can't get it, and that was well spotted. I move my bishop there anyway, and now he starts throwing pawns up, and so do I. And he advances this pawn, maybe not necessary. I think maybe allowing me to capture there and recapturing, oh, not there, with the f pawn would be absolutely fine as well. Then he could put his rook here and start attacking these weak pawns of mine. But he advances, and I'm not sure that was the right idea. And then this is a blunder. He's put his knight on a square where, if captured by my bishop, he cannot recapture because the defender is pinned. So he's now down a piece in the pawn. No, just a piece. Now he's down a piece in the pawn with check. King moves. I block off the pawns. I get knights and rooks mixed up all the time. Rook comes in, but now I spot that it is possible to imprison the rook. And I mean, you know, when you see a piece come into your space where it has quite a few other pieces around it, it should be a question that you ask yourself: is that rook trappable? And the answer is yes. And the next question is, well, okay, but now I've got a bishop and a rook acting as prison guards against one rook, which pretty much negates the whole benefit of having an extra bishop. So now what I'm thinking is, what can I do to capture that rook? And the only piece I think that can reasonably do it is my king. King's a powerful piece. Comes across. Now I decide to trade off rooks, and now this rook's got nowhere to go. And that is pretty much the end of the game. It's an extremely difficult situation now for black to even try and compete. And here he knows he's done, because he can go here, and these are the only squares on the board now where the king can go. He could potentially grab that, but it's going to take him so long to do it, right? So you see what I mean about quarantining the king. Because my rook is there on a safe square, it means that only the space inside of here is accessible. But by the time the king comes down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, get out the way, 6, 7, 8, 9 moves it would take for him to get a queen. Whereas for me, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's it. Okay. Alternatively, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, you know, he spotted it was a losing position. It absolutely is a losing position. Did the right thing to resign at that point. So I hope you've got some few little tactical hints and tips from this. I think it was actually a very instructive game in the end. Thank you to my opponent. Thank you for watching and for your support. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. I'll see you soon.